So as I always say, welcome sport fans, welcome sport fans. Welcome to the 6th conversation of the Institute for Education's Safer at Home Speaker Series, hashtag IFE Online, featuring the former White House Presidential Innovation Fellow and the Institute for Education's inaugural 220 Civic Tech Service Awardee, Mike Brown. The mission of IFE is to harness the power of data, innovation, and soft diplomacy in the global community. Mike, you are an IFE veteran and have IFE DNA, continuing the tradition of distinguished special guests from Nobel Prize laureates to Supreme Court justices. Welcome to our extraordinary and plenipotentiary excellencies with us today from the European Union, Singapore, Estonia, Albania, the Bahamas, Marshall Islands, and Cote d'Ivoire, and diplomats from over 30 countries. And we always love seeing so many of Mike's fellow White House Presidential Innovation Fellows and their leader, Josh DeFrancis. You can wave there, Josh. Joining United States Digital Services, Tech Congress, and Coding It Forward Fellows, our baby PIFs, as we call them. And a big shout out to our lead support with massive gratitude, Microsoft, Charter Communications, Crown Castle, IFE Innovation Steward, Dr. Amy Gang and Todd Park, Matt Cutts, IFE Stewards, Dr. R. David and Joanne Edelman, and John Paul and Britt Farmer. Now, we have a very exciting preview of a new IFE initiative. IFE Steward, MIT professor, and former Special Assistant to the President, Dr. R. David Edelman, and I have been exploring this effort along the lines of wise, or not so wise, AI. Dr. Edelman, please.
Thank you so much, Coach, and thank you all for taking the time to join. I know how incredibly busy and back-to-back everyone is with Zoom calls, and this is going to be another good one. So thank you so much, Josh and Mike, for joining us. Before we get to the program today, I wanted to tease, and this is an unofficial announcement so far, a new program that we're in the process of launching here at IFE. The event that we're looking to preview is the Institute for Education Future of AI Roundtable. And its mission is going to be to build a global community of practice and dialogue around the governance of increasingly intelligent, but as Coach said, not always so wise machines. This roundtable is going to be designed to engage leaders from government, industry, and civil society with the mission of collaborative leadership to deliver ethical, trustworthy artificial intelligence systems that help deliver a more just, innovative, and opportunity-rich world for all of us. This is a theme that you heard over and over the course of the last couple of years across IFE events on a whole range of topics. And it got to a point that we just made clear we need to have a dedicated focus on this to bring this community together and to do so in a global way that is consistent with how IFE has really developed and pioneered this sort of innovative dialogue on technology issues. And we are delighted that leading this effort is IFE's new diplomatic steward of AI, ambassador from the European Union, Stavros Lambrinidis, who will serve as its ambassadorial chair. So with his permission, Stavros, I don't know if you want to provide a few words.
David, thank you so much. It's absolutely fantastic, Kathy, to work with IFE on this groundbreaking initiative that you're taking. And when you suggested it to me, I enthusiastically accepted because, frankly, this is so much on the top of the European agenda and my agenda as well. Just 2 examples. Easy ones, quick ones. I mean, all the apps that we're using now that can change our lives allow us to open up the tracing apps, the health apps, such promise. And at the same time, they could change entirely the way that we could be monitored. Looking inside the body as opposed to outside the body could allow governments, companies to know what we think and why we're thinking and what we feel and why we feel it before we even do. And that, you might say, well, maybe that's okay in a democracy, but unfortunately, as we're talking about AI, and David mentioned the human-centric, the transparent way that we want to build it, there are others out there that are using it for entirely different purposes. So this is not going to be an easy process. And I think that the big democracies of the world, the Europeans and the Americans, have a responsibility and obligation to work together and deal with this, including with major companies around the world. I remember a few years back in 2007, 8, 9, when we were talking about privacy at the European Parliament, there were many digital companies coming and telling us that we're being too strict about privacy, that we were, endangering innovation, that we weren't getting it. And then a few years later, I'm so proud to see that there are many companies that are actually competing with each other and who provides the greatest privacy. The way that we're thinking about this has changed. Maybe I can close this remarks by something that I used to talk with friends back then, and I still do. Some people would come to me and say, Mr. Lambrinidis, are you a terrorist? No. Are you an organized criminal? No. Then what do you care? If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And I used to answer, you know what, if you have nothing to hide, you don't have a life. Get a life. We all have something perfectly legitimate to hide, perfectly legal to hide. If you have nothing to hide, in fact, why don't you just give me the results of your last, physical exam? Give me your credit card number. Tell me all your boyfriends and girlfriends of the past 10 years, including the secret ones. I mean, we all have something perfectly legitimate to hide. That's what democracy is all about. This is not a debate that will go away. This is a discussion that we can lead. And I'm very, very proud to be able to do it with IFE. And thank you so much for this invitation.
Great. Well, thank you, Ambassador and IFE Diplomatic Steward. This is a brand new position we have created. And welcome to the IFE community. We could not be more amped and proud of your leadership in this new program, The Future of AI. And thank you, Dr. Edelman. And now, there could not be a person who personifies civic tech service better than Josh Marcuse. He is IFE DNA. Josh worked with Mike Brown at Defense Innovation Board as Executive Director of the Defense Innovation Board. And now he's head of strategy and innovation at Global Cloud Public Sector. He founded the Federal Innovator Young Professionals Network and Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, where he is the chairman. Josh is an amazing team player, wonderful to work with, and gets it done. As Todd Park always says, compounded awesomeness. So Josh, please take it away.
It's really an honor to be here and to see many familiar faces, all of whom have accomplished so many exceptional things. Coach, you're just a master at bringing together the right people for the timely conversation. So it's really a thrill to be here, especially to be with Mike Brown, someone that I just loved working with and admire so much, an amazing perspective. I'm not going to embarrass him too much because really you just want to hear from him, and you have his bio in your email, but I will just say that, the whole notion of the Presidential Innovation Fellow is to take leading minds and leaders of big organizations that have succeeded in the private sector and give them a chance to have an impact in the public sector. And coming from the role of being a CEO of one of the top 10 largest software companies in the world, Symantec, arguably #1 for cybersecurity, and bringing that to the Department of Defense, where he's had an exceptional impact at the Defense Innovation Unit, is really just sort of typifies, I think, the aspirational vision of what the PIF program is all about. So thank you for joining us, Mike. And why don't we just start with hearing from you? And I know you have a few slides you want to show us about the anniversary that you're celebrating right now, that we're all celebrating, those of us who were there for the first ribbon cutting at DIU. So tell us a bit about what the 5-year journey looks like and what the future holds for DIU, and then we'll just have a conversation.
Well, great. Josh, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. Josh and I have a mutual admiration society for each other because he's also done some incredible work as the executive director of the Defense Innovation Board, which we work closely with. And great to be here with so many familiar faces, fellow Presidential Innovation Fellows and former fellows. So thanks for joining us here. And a special shout out to Coach. Thank you for all the incredible energy and work you bring to the Institute for Education. Just tremendous that you're involved in this and the great work that you're sponsoring. Well, as Josh mentioned, we're very excited to be celebrating 5 years It's gone by quickly. I wasn't here from the beginning, but Josh was. And I understand that that was not all up and to the right, as some pretty rocky early days at the Defense Innovation Unit. Any organization as big as the Pentagon trying to do something new, there's a lot of antibodies that were out in the beginning, hoping we wouldn't be successful. But our being here today shows that we prevailed, and we have a lot that we're excited about that's been accomplished in those 5 years. And I hope to share with you just over the next 10 or 15 minutes some of what we've done at DIU, but we think most of the work that we need to do is yet to come. So we were formed in 2015. Secretary Ash Carter really started with a number of initiatives to increase innovation across defense. DIU is one, the Defense Innovation Board is one, the Defense Digital Service is one, which really comes out of work that the Presidential Innovation Fellows know well, 18F, and the Digital Service across the federal government, something that Todd Park has been involved with as well. So DIU's specific mission, I often think that it's misnamed. It really should be the Defense Commercial Technology Unit. We really now combine 3 different organizations. So what I'll call core DIU, which is where we began, and 2 additional ones that were added in 2018 when I became the director. So DIU, we want to be known for speed. We're fast moving. We're an organization, while there are many that are focused in the Pentagon on moving more rapidly and innovating, we're a joint organization, so we cross all of DoD, meaning we work on projects with all the services, many of the combatant commands, and also across the defense agencies. And what really makes us unique is this focus on commercial companies and commercial technology. So what Ash Carter saw back 5 years ago is that a lot of the R&D happening in some of the game-changing technologies, and by that we mean artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, biotechnology, autonomous systems, that's really happening in the commercial world. So if we were having this talk in the 1960s or 70s, DoD would be leading the technology development in many of these game-changing technologies. Not the case anymore. DoD leads in a couple, hypersonics being an example, maybe directed energy. But for most of these technologies, which are going to be critical for our military capability, it's the commercial world that we need to turn to. So DoD goes from being an innovator in these areas to being a fast follower. And that requires some different motion, and that's what Ash Carter had in mind when he set up DIU. So his original vision is something that we're still doing today. That's the first part of our mission, accelerating the adoption of commercial technology. Again, how do we be the fast follower and incorporate that technology quickly and get it fielded? We're all about getting capability into the warfighter's hands. There's no reason why our warfighters should be working with yesterday's technology. We need to get them the latest and the greatest. And then from Secretary Mattis's time, I remember my interview with him when he said to me, "You're a small organization at DIU. We need you to be working on things that go across the department. How can you bring us new capabilities?" And when he said that, I was pretty daunted by that charge. But when I went away to think about it, it's all about what we choose to work on that determines whether we can do something that's transformational versus just yet another technology. So some of what we try and do works across all the services. Good example, predictive maintenance. How can we do a better job of understanding what parts are going to fail in anything that moves before it fails? The commercial world is all over this. Why not bring that technology to DoD? We started with the Air Force. Now we're working with the Marines and the Army, and also talking with the Navy about that. So that's the idea of a transformative project, a technology that goes across all of our military. And then for my time working for the first R&E Undersecretary Mike Griffin, strengthening the national security innovation base. This is a concept in the National Defense Strategy that basically says we have to, in competing with China, we have to be harnessing all of that innovation capability from the startups, the venture world, the investors, the incubators, academia, our national labs. There's so many players in what the defense strategy calls the innovation base, and we need to make sure we're making the most of all of those. So 2 other organizations were joined with DIU at that time. One that sponsors the Hacking for Defense course at about 40 universities. We call that organization National Security Innovation Network. This idea is to bring innovators together, maybe folks who are not exposed to national security, and get their ideas on how to solve national security problems. And then the last organization just getting underway right now with some authorization and appropriation from Congress, a fund that will stimulate private capital for dual use hardware. One of the things that we've observed is the software industry is very well funded by our venture capitalists. If you're in a hardware business, it's very hard to get the money to get a new battery technology, quantum sensor, space component funded in the US. And this is something we want to play a role in because those are the suppliers that we're going to need a decade from now. So DIU wants to play a role in getting those suppliers ready to be supplying to the Defense Department. And over the course of the 5 years, we've introduced about 65 first-time vendors to DIU and done about almost 100 projects now. Okay. We're organized into 5 different technology portfolio areas. I think that was on the previous slide. So they are the areas where technology is being developed by the commercial sector. So that's autonomous systems, AI technology, cyber, human systems, anything to make a human more effective in an adverse environment. That could be a dietary supplement, a helmet, or something else like that. And then commercial space, so that we're not having to fund all of that from the federal government. We saw a great example of that this summer with SpaceX launch of astronauts. So if we take a minute just to talk about what have we done in the last 5 years, interestingly enough, some of what we've done has not been project oriented, although that's probably what we're known for. We created a special process, commercial solutions opening, which is basically a way to go very fast with defense acquisition. How can we winnow down from a few dozen suppliers who might be interested in a DoD contract, choose the best, and then prototype with them, and how can we get that capability fielded? So that's a process we developed. And a lot of what we've done is launch new capabilities. So if anyone's heard of Kessel Run, one of the software factories for the Air Force, that started at DIU. It was a capability that was well beyond working with a commercial vendor, and the Air Force kind of graduated that and took that over. Another group that has worked to provide secure drones, we called Rogue Squadron, that transferred last year to the Defense Digital Service. And then we were there at the beginning of the JAIC, the Joint AI Center within DoD. And then the initiative I just talked about, National Security Innovation Capital. We have transitioned a number of programs. Shield AI is a handheld quadcopter that gives you real-time video inside buildings, plus infrared sensors to see where bad guys are. So if you're clearing a building in urban combat, you definitely want their product with you. Predictive maintenance, I talked about before, how to bring the best of what the commercial world is using to understand maintenance to the military. Blue SUS, just happening right now. This is an effort to make sure that in the future, we have US and allied suppliers of small drones, SUS, small unmanned aerial systems. So we're involved in an effort to standardize the product offering, the requirements across the Army, which is where it started, extending to the Air Force and the Marines, and also aggregate buying power across the federal government. So 5 suppliers that are successful in this program were just put on the GSA schedule. So the Department of Interior, Customs Border Patrol, anyone who's buying small drones can now get a well-tested, cyber-secure drone and help these vendors be economically viable competitors to DJI, a Chinese company that has 75% of the worldwide market share in small drones. On the right are interesting, from my standpoint, interesting projects that we're working on today. There's 7 of these transformative ones. I'll just tell you about the first one. Air Threat Response is helping NORAD be able to fuse all of their sensor data together. Believe it or not, NORAD had different silos of information so that they spent, of the 12, 13 minutes the president would have to respond to incoming attack, they would spend 10 minutes correlating among different sets of data to understand what are they seeing, when really what they need is a common operating picture. So we've worked with a small vendor who has not done business with the Defense Department before, and they're putting in their AI platform this sensor fusion together. Now we're able to take 10 minutes of work and compress that into 1 to 2 minutes. So very important capability improvement for NORAD. Northcom is thrilled with that. One of the things that we're pleased about is that we're leveraging the other people's money the venture capitalists. So for every dollar we spend in a prototype contract, there's about 10x private investment made into those companies. So in some cases, it's even larger than that, 10x DoD funds and 10x to 100x in private capital. So we're very efficient with the money that we're entrusted with. Just some stats that will help you size the impact of DIU. So working with companies that leverage 10 billion in private investments, we're doing about triple the projects that we did 2 years ago. Our transition rate, or what we actually get to the field, is up quite a bit, now at 43%. We're not going to be happy until that's 60 or 70%. Almost 200 contracts awarded. I mentioned earlier, we're about to start our 100th project. We're influencing about 643 million. That's quite a bit of growth from where we started, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what DoD spend. So let's talk about what's ahead for the next 5 years. If I remember the next slide, maybe before this one. So what's ahead for us is a new portfolio. We're adding to those 5 portfolios advanced energy and materials. Every part of the DoD is looking at what can we do for better energy storage, propulsion technologies. So that's going to be an important capability that goes across. We want to fill in this gap we talked about for new hardware suppliers with National Security Innovation Capital. Continue to recruit across from DoD and commercial companies to add to the talent at DoD. Something I'll talk about next, how do we scale this adoption? Because while we're proud of what we've done, it's a drop in the bucket, as I mentioned. And a new area that I'd love to be tackling is how to work with partners and allies. We have a lot of requests from our allies to work together on new technologies, and how can we support some companies in other geographies in Europe or in Singapore, Australia, India, and vice versa. How can we at DIU take advantage of the innovation bases in those countries? In fact, the National Security Innovation Base really should be the Allied Security Innovation Base. We have taken advantage in those contracts. I mentioned about 5 of them have gone to foreign firms. There's probably an opportunity to increase that in the years ahead. So I'll just talk about 2 aspects of this quickly, and then we'll take some questions. So how do we increase that scale? One issue is getting more dollars flowing through this ecosystem. So that $650 million over a 2-year period, 2 years is about the time of a project, is really well less than 1% of what DoD spent. So we have to figure out how more of the DoD can use commercial technology. So we're working on that, of course. And then on the right-hand side, a tremendous amount of work has been done on acquisition reform. I feel like we have the tools we need for acquiring different types of products at different speeds and with different requirements. There's a flexible or adaptive acquisition model in place now. But where we really need the help is how fast can we go? So as many folks will recognize who've done some time in government, this is the timeline. If we want to spend $1 of money, we're about to enter fiscal year 2021. So October is the beginning of that fiscal year. If we want to spend $1 in October, we would have had to start planning that 2 years earlier. So if you're following the cycles of some of these technology products we just talked about, especially in the AI or cyber world, it's ludicrous to think that you're going to know 2 years in advance what you need to be spending on. We need to have much more flexible budget authority for folks at the Pentagon to be able to adapt to something that came up that they hadn't thought of and be able to improve our ability to procure the latest technology. Let's go on to the last slide. So in general, what we're trying to do is expand this national security innovation, as we talked about before. So we want to be able to attract new investment. National Security Innovation Capital is one of the ways to do that. There's some supply chain choke points we need to be more sophisticated on. And there's a lot of DoD entities doing similar things that we need to coordinate them on. Won't bore you with the acronym soup there, but we can be doing a better job there. And then just make sure we have all the tools to access that technology that gets developed. These are some of what we've done at DIU. There's probably other tools that would help us do that even more. And we're starting some work with a couple of think tanks in DC to help us take a broader look and an objective look at what could be done, both to expand the National Security Innovation Base and how we access that. So just a quick snapshot of what we've done at DIU. As I mentioned before, we're very pleased to be celebrating our 5th birthday. but there's so much left to do. As Josh knows, we're just scratching the surface, and we're excited to tackle some of the challenges that we need to for the next 5 years. Back to you, Josh.
Fantastic. Well, I know we really want to hear audience questions, which you guys can put in the chat, and we'll be, in a few minutes, we'll be turning over to Coach, and Amy will be facilitating questions from all of you, but I get to ask at least a handful to get us started. So, you know, I think we can all read about tech and innovation transformation in DoD at all the many think tank reports we see coming out, but what we can't hear about is what it feels like to be part of this transformation. And so that's why I want to start the conversation, Mike, is you talked about how DoD is used to being a leader and now it's a fast follower. That's a very disruptive mindset shift for all the leaders across the department, and DIU is sort of at the vanguard. So what is it like to be a government leader that is taking your organization through a technological transformation like this?
Well, Josh, you know well, there's really two sides to this. The side working with the Pentagon is really getting DoD to realize we're not able to call the shots and determine the processes. So we're so used to being able to tell companies how to do business our way. And we've done such a good job of that we have now a very small number of defense primes as they've consolidated to work with us in the way we are used to working. So that works well when we're buying fighter aircraft or an aircraft carrier, but it doesn't work well when we're buying software or small drones or other products like that. So what we have to do inside the department is really get the department realizing that we have a new way to do business, and it needs to be based on speed. There's opportunity cost for these small innovative companies, and we've got to make sure that DoD can look like a reasonable customer, not someone that's going to overwhelm them with our specialized process and going very slow. So one of the things that we're proud of doing is getting the vendors a no quickly if they're not going to be chosen. So one side of it is working with the Pentagon. We've got to adapt our processes to work with the commercial sector. The exciting part is working with all these technology companies, because despite what, and Josh knows this, despite the over publicized Google Project Maven story, Google, we have 2 projects with Google right now. Many companies, including Google, want to work with the Department of Defense. So we're not seeing any resistance to that whatsoever. In fact, as long as we can show companies that there is something at the end of the rainbow, if they do the work to qualify and we can get them a quick yes or no, they're happy to work with us. In fact, the number of companies responding to DIU solicitations, which is really, we have a problem, can you help, is up 40% year over year. So that's the exciting part. There's no limit to what we can do in terms of accessing that innovation base.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you about the Silicon Valley DoD relationship, but I think you sort of put some of those rumors to bed. It sounds like 40% growth year on year, that there's plenty of companies in the tech sector that want to work with the department and with the government in general, which I'm sure is great. But let me ask you this: what do you think is the most important change that you want to see DoD make to make it even easier for those companies to work with the department? What is the biggest thing standing in your way still?
So the biggest obstacle, and I guess before I answer that question, I should say, as we probably all know, that doesn't mean that every employee at every company would support that, but we do have the managements on board, including at Google, supporting DoD. So I think we've seen some bashing from DoD to companies in the Valley, Google being one, that has really said, hey, get on board, you need to support the US military. The companies are on board. We need to now make sure it's easy to work with us. So back to the one problem, if we could fix, maybe wave a magic wand, it would be this budget flexibility question. So there's a common term many of you will recognize, the valley of death. There's actually many valleys of death that companies can experience as they get from how to form a company, develop the technology, and then scale. But the one that we want to be able to solve is, if you have successfully prototyped your technology, can we be ready immediately for that uptake? We have the legal authority through other transaction authority to be able to do that. We can go through a prototype process and not have to recompete that business, which you might have to do with other contracting methods. But as we talked about before, the money may not be there because you would have had to plan 2 years in advance. So that's what I'd love to see changed, the trust between Congress and the DoD, so that there's flexibility within those budgets to say, if you find something that's the right substitute for what I'm providing this money for, please take advantage of that and give us something that is leading edge technology that potentially is less expensive. Go ahead and do that. There's no incentives right now in the system for someone to take that risk and substitute a new product for basically what Congress appropriated the dollars for.
That makes great sense. You're right. I did live through that myself as well. Let me ask you just two more quick questions, and we'll turn to the audience. So, I think a lot of people may not know this about you, but before you became the head of DIU, when you were a PIF, you were doing a fascinating project that really, I think, captured a lot of people's imagination about China and the role that China and the Communist Party was playing in our own backyard, in our own venture capital ecosystem. And now, you were very prescient back then, but now with TikTok and Huawei, it's headlines every day. So what do you think is the right balance between some of the anxiety that clearly the government is facing and experiencing, and the hat you used to wear as a CEO, knowing that there's some amount of just integration of the global economy and our education systems are unavoidable? And like, how do you, as literally one of the leading experts in the country on this, how would you recommend we strike a balance?
Well, we could spend hours on this, and I'll try not to and make this succinct. This is what opened my eyes to how important it is to be successful at DIU. The well-funded, thoughtful, systematic approach that China is taking to integrate technology from around the world and really apply that to their military and control their society. Worst example, obviously, being what we're seeing with the Uyghurs. I think number one, our private sector CEOs, we all need to be educated on what China is doing. The administration has done a great job of really raising the temperature here, so everyone realizes there's something to be concerned about. I don't think there's consensus on what we should be doing. And primarily what we need to be doing is investing in ourselves. So a lot of the attention is being focused on some of what I'll call the defensive measures, what we don't want to have happen with Chinese companies. And there's definitely a role for that. I worked on that as a result of the study that you mentioned with the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act. It gave CFIUS more control investments. But if you look at what we need to do is recognize we're in a tech race with China. While it's very different from the Cold War, a number of those things we did in the Cold War would apply and serve us well here. Examples, federal investment in R&D. Our private sector is not taking up the slack in all cases to give us the technology breakthroughs we need. This is the seed corn that provides the economic success we want to see in the next couple of decades. And when we look at what happened with the investments in the 60s and 70s, where the internet is created, modern networking, computational horsepower, miniaturized semiconductors, GPS, on, that has fueled an enormous economy for us in high tech that Silicon Valley is still benefiting from. You don't have Uber and Airbnb without these technologies. The federal government is the only source of the long-term capital, the patient capital that can afford to lose some of that money that will create those breakthroughs for the future. So our federally funded R&D as a percentage of GDP, 2% in the 1960s is now down to 0.7. Half of that spent on health, which we appreciate in this pandemic time, but that means we're from 2% down to 0.35 that's focused on national security oriented technologies. So that we're not, the trend is not in the right direction to be leading there. So more investment required there in achieving breakthroughs in these game-changing technologies. STEM education, something else we did in the 60s. We need more engineers. China is graduating 6 or 8 times the number of engineers we are. think about the implications for our immigration policy as we talk about that, which has to be tied together with that. We need to be thinking more long-term in the private sector. I can tell you as a former CEO, so many incentives to think short-term, quarterly earnings, the influence of activists and private equity in our public equity markets. These things are not helpful when we're competing with someone in China that has a 20, 30, 40-year time horizon. We got to be thinking a lot more about the game-changing technologies where the U.S. needs to lead. And then finally, more integrated economic statecraft. I'm not saying to duplicate what China has done, but we're not using the instruments that we have in the U.S. government in a coordinated fashion to think about how do we make sure that we have policies allowing for our companies to be leading in some of these game-changing technologies. Think about standards as just one quick example. China has moved on from Made in China 2025 to Standards 2035. They want 5G to be the tip of the iceberg. They want to control all of those leading technologies, AI, autonomous systems, cyber, on and on. We can't let that happen. We've got to make sure that we're doing the right things to maintain the lead.
That was every bit as nuanced as I was hoping for. Thank you. We have to turn it over, and I wanted to ask you about COVID and AI and so many other things, but let me just close with an easy one. What is your favorite part of your job?
You know, the mission is really an incredible one, and I get to work with so many talented people. I mean, sometimes I have to pinch myself thinking we have such an amazing talent. There's a small group, 100 folks at DIU, but the talent that we have assembled because of the mission really is inspiring to me every day. PhDs who are specialists in their field, folks who've done policy work. So I'm really excited by the team. That's really what keeps me going.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you for your service and just being an amazing partner. Let me turn it over
for many on this call.
Yeah, many people on the call. Let me turn it over to Amy and Coach to lead the rest of our conversation. But it's always such a pleasure to connect with you, Mike, and thank you so much for just such a thoughtful discussion tonight.
Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate your friendship and your partnership.
Thank you, Mike and Josh, for this fantastic conversation. And now we'd like to welcome questions from the audience, which you can share through the chat window. John Paul Farmer, I know you have a question. And please tell us your affiliation besides being an IFE steward and co-founder of the PIF program, along with my husband. John?
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it. John Paul Farmer, Chief Technology Officer of New York City. Mike, I want to say thank you for that presentation. Really terrific. And obviously, thank you for your continued service. So you mentioned a number of these building blocks that are now in place: the Defense Innovation Unit, the Defense Innovation Board, Defense Digital Service, and obviously the ones that have been there for a long time, like DARPA, which we wouldn't have the internet as we know it today without DARPA.
Right.
Have you had any issues stepping on each other's toes, or the opposite of a lack of communication where you're not actually building on top of each other's efforts the way you could? And I'm curious whether, well, to what extent you see those other units as essential to your ability to reach the other, I think it's 99.8% of procurements that today are not being influenced by the good work that you're doing.
Well, John, thank you for starting the PIF program. So many of us here have benefited from your work, so appreciate that. Yeah, I think you raise a good point. It's as if at the department we've let at least 100 flowers bloom, not 1,000. And probably is time to take a step and say, how could we better coordinate among all of these different units? They all have a little bit different place in the ecosystem. So I'm a big fan of the number of innovation units that have gotten started. So I think for what we have more, it has been better. They're not duplicative. But I think we could amplify each other's efforts if we worked more closely together. So Josh was working with me on the first conference to bring the IC innovation units and the DoD innovation units together. COVID, had a say in that, so we weren't able to go forward. But now we're planning that as a virtual conference, I'm pleased to say, targeting mid-February. That'll be a chance to expand from what has been one-on-one conversations. So we're meeting with AFWorks, or we're meeting with Naval X and others. And we're going to partner, of course, with Josh's former organization, the Defense Innovation Board, to put this conference on. And that'll really have three objectives. One is, let's at least understand what each organization's role is. Two, what are the obstacles we're all finding to scaling our work? I gave you an example of one today with budget flexibility. Let's find out what those are in common, if there are obstacles in common. And then third, how could we amplify each other's efforts, at least with the messaging back to the Hill and senior leadership on what would make our efforts more successful. So I think that will be a nice step forward to put us more in sync.
Thank you. Next, we have Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis from the European Union. Ambassador, please unmute yourself.
Stavros, mute. Unmute. Thank you.
So, yeah, so again, sorry about this. Mike, thanks a lot. Fantastic presentation, Josh as well. Quick question. As you try to develop these new defense technologies, what kind of discussions are you having about the human rights implications, ethical implications of them? Do you have someone in your 100 people who is dedicated to focus on that kind of discussion, for example? Are you trying to bake in some of those technologies that might be more human rights compliant than, of course, what China is doing with the Uyghurs, as you pointed out, front-loading them in the technology itself? Or are you having discussions about, appropriate use, including potentially setting legislative standards around the world on what should be or should not be the appropriate use for some of them?
Absolutely. We don't have folks within DIU who are developing those ethical standards, but fortunately we do at DoD. Josh led an effort to really ensure that we had ethical standards for use of AI. So the Defense Innovation Board led that, and I'm pleased to say, I think Josh would be too, that those are pretty much adopted wholesale by the Secretary of Defense. So it's a perfect example of where we see those standards being developed. We clearly want to be on board with that. We have an effort within DIU now to talk to our vendors and prospective vendors about how we expect to see those applied. So while we won't be developing those standards in the future, we're going to rely on the rest of the organization at DoD to do that. And I think that's one of the advantages we have in this tech race with China, is we want to be working with allies on common standards and not going rogue, nor do we want to think that the development of the technology is so critical we want to put those standards aside. It's very important to have that be an integrated process as we go forward. So appreciate your question, very much in sync with it.
Thank you. Next, we have Jackie Kazil, former Presidential Innovation Fellow. Jackie?
Yeah, hi. Presidential Innovation Fellow from 2013. I worked with FEMA now. Hey, now I work at Rebellion Defense with Chris.
Nice.
So my question was around the opportunities you had open. Right now, the website says there are zero opportunities open, or zero solicitations. Explicitly, they use the word solicitations. And so I'm wondering, why is that? How often do solicitations come through? What is the cadence for that? Has that changed during your time? And then to follow up on that, within a change of administration, what kind of impact do you see in general happening with respect to solicitations and your unit and the work that's happening right now?
Great, Jackie. Yeah, very nice to see you again. So we have about 35 projects underway, as I mentioned, over the 5 years, about 91, almost 100 started. So, and a solicitation is typically open for 2 weeks. So we wouldn't necessarily have a solicitation open at a particular time. So we might have, as I just indicated, maybe 20 to 25 per year. And so sometimes you'd see one, sometimes you wouldn't. We're up about 3x. We have expanded our capacity quite a bit. We're lucky in FY20 to get a 55% budget increase, and we're executing on that fully. So we have tripled the number of projects that we've done over the last 2 years. We're up about 50% over the last year. So I do hope that we'll be able to continue to expand the number of projects. In large part, that will depend on what happens with support from Congress. As you know, we don't have the appropriations bill done for FY21 yet. So that will be the biggest determinant for us. In terms of administration, whether it's a second Trump administration or a change administration, the one thing that I appreciate, and I'm sure Josh does too, is innovation is not a partisan issue. Democrats, Republicans, everybody wants to see more capability get to the warfighter. They want to see it done with less money. We're one of the ways that we can make sure that the department is stretching its dollar. Let's buy as much as we can commercially and save the defense dollars that we need to for things we can only buy from our military suppliers. So that's kind of our philosophy. There's a lot of leverage that we can achieve through DIU. And of course, that's no surprise, the message I'm always giving to the Hill.
Thank you. Next, we have Nick Sinai from Insight Partners and the Harvard Kennedy School. Nick?
Hey, Mike, nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. I had a few questions. I'll fire them off at you. You can choose which one you want to answer. One is, how does DIU actually teach the rest of DoD? Because there's a natural rate of growth into the number of projects that you can do. But I think the home run here is if we can get the PEOs, the COCOMs, the IC agencies outside of DoD doing what DIU does. And I fear that sometimes people just collapse it to an OTA, this acquisition authority. Then there's so much more to your model in terms of really understanding and engaging with commercial and then working with defense customers to collapse the requirements and appreciate the benefits and the limitations of commercial. So how do you think about actually spreading the practices beyond the projects that you're able to execute on behalf? That would be one. The other one would be the rise of the defense VC market, right? You see investments in companies that where, the next generation Palantirs, whether the Rebellion Defenses, Andurils, those kinds of things. And then there's this big structural problem that just drives me crazy, which maybe you have a perspective on, which is the large primes and the way that we build stuff in DoD as kind of the first impulse, because that's where most of the money goes. And that's how we evaluate and how we actually buy and integrate most of this technology is through these primes. I wonder if you have a perspective on that.
Okay, well, let's go back. Let's see, your first question. Your first question, remind me again.
How do we teach the rest?
Oh, the teaching. Yeah, so tough for me to keep the three things in my head at one time. So we are happy to share what we've learned with anyone within DoD, and we are flattered to see that a number of people have adopted this commercial solutions opening process, as I mentioned. Army Futures Command has adopted it. AirForce has adopted it. I don't know if they've adopted it exactly the same way, but it doesn't matter. And anyone who will come talk to us, we're happy to share what we're doing. We're doing that with some other governments as well. The UK has been in to talk to us. India's been in to talk to us. We're happy to share. But we don't view it as our mission to be proselytizing or teaching. And I know that Congress would not give us more dollars if we told them that we've taught 50 organizations, but by the way, I've only executed half the projects I did the previous year. So I think we're realistic about how we're measured, what we're expected to do. So we need to keep focusing on bringing those capabilities to the market. But we're happy to share with folks along the way and do anytime that we're asked. My perspective on the increasing number of vendors that are focused on the defense market, I love that. I mean, I think we need to show that this is a viable way for companies to be successful and frankly make money for investors. So to Rebellion, to Anduril, who is a vendor that we're working with, we think that's a fantastic development. In fact, there's a group on the West Coast now, you might be familiar with, the Defense Investor Network, that really is trying to pull all of those folks together and provide some content so that their job's made a little bit easier by the common introductions. And it's a platform for those of us in government to present some of the ongoing requirements. So the NSA is presented, the CIA is presented as an example. So I think that's a fantastic development. Okay, and you had a third question.
The role of the prime in commercial tech.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the education at DoD of if we want access to the leading technology, we have to work in a different way, and that's not a comfortable motion for a lot of people at DoD. So we just have to get more folks within DoD to realize what are the benefits of going commercially, and that we can. We have experience with doing that now, so that that's one of the tools that someone reaches for in acquisition now. You don't have to just do it with a prime. I will say that DIU works with primes. Probably 10 to 15% of our contracts are with primes when we need to integrate capability from multiple vendors. So that's a perfect role for primes to play. And when they may not have access to leading technology, if they can help integrate that, because we all know DoD does not like some assembly required, then we can take advantage of their capabilities and bring in new vendors to DoD. So that's a model we'd like to see be on the rise. Thanks, Nick. Thanks.
We have several questions about healthcare, biotech, genomics, and biosecurity. Is the DIU doing that sort of work, or is that part of NIH? How are we approaching that?
So we don't have a portfolio focused on biotechnology. We're working pretty closely with, we're in an organization, Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and there is a biotechnology directorate there. So we're working especially on bioengineered processes. So the reason we don't work on, you can think about it as new compounds, new drugs, anything that requires FDA approval, we are not really value add. We can't make that go faster. So that needs to be the vendors working with FDA. So when we looked at those in the past, we can't help as much, but there are probably some areas where we can be involved. I had a very interesting conversation with the CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks recently. Phenomenal company if you're not familiar with it. Amy, I know you are. And they had some pretty interesting ideas that we're trying to take forward in terms of having a early warning system globally for new diseases. Think about it as early warning signs for the next pandemic. So there are some things that I think we could be doing there. We want to stay involved in that conversation as an example.
Thank you. We probably have time for one last question, or maybe two. So let's see. So someone, Bob Yarab would like to ask a question about space.
Yeah, hi, I work at the Science and Technology Policy Institute, STIPI, that supports the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. The question I had was, DoD has a 15-20 billion budget for space, and DIU also invests in space. So how do you decide, what is sort of the DIU sweet spot?
Yeah, great question. And this is very similar to other technology areas where AI, as an example, why are we not duplicating what the department is doing in AI, which would have a much bigger budget than what DIU has. So we're scouting constantly. We have a group called the Defense Engagement Team. And if we were a private company, that you'd think of that as sales, but in government, that's not really an acceptable term. So, but they're working with other parts of the department, and think about in space, it includes the agencies, NGA, NRO, the Space Development Agency, which is also within R&E, and looking for where are the projects that would benefit from commercial technology. So they help us do that sorting process. And then from those, when we have agreement with a DoD partner, like SMC would be a good example, or NRO, when there's agreement on where do we need some commercial technology, then we get involved. So a good example of one of our transformative projects, Peacetime Indications and Warning, we call it. So that combines rapid launch. So we're working with the companies doing rockets where they want to sell as a service. So we help facilitate the contract and the prototypes to test those rockets. Small satellites, so think about the synthetic aperture radar satellites that help you see through day and night, clouds. We're helping those get launched, doing that with our DoD partners. And then the digital imagery, the analysis of the imagery from commercial satellites, also involved in that as well. So that one project brings together vendors and different DoD partners to bring that whole capability together. That's something, fortunately, General Hyten is following closely as the vice chairman. And those have been prototyped successfully. So that's an example of, okay, well, now we need to buy that. We need to structure the right commercial contracts. So in that way, we work as kind of another adjunct or tool set for DoD partners, because we know what's going on in the commercial world, and we've got the ability to move quickly. So they turn to us then to execute some of their agenda.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you. Now, do we have time for one more? Or so, Mike Brown, I know I speak for all of us. We all feel safer that you are doing what you're doing, and so thank you very much for being at DIU there. What made you decide to apply to the PIP program, and what can we do to get more people like you into government?
Well, I was at the right time in my career and looking for a new challenge and something to contribute, to give back. And what could be better than the PIP program for that? And I was very fortunate to get connected to the mission at DIU. I'll be honest, this is the best job I've ever had. It's the most fun. I love the mission, working with the folks at DIU, as I mentioned earlier. It's just an incredible opportunity. So I appreciate your giving me thanks, but I should be giving all of you thanks as taxpayers, the phenomenal opportunity to contribute. And that's what national service really is all about, isn't it?
Well, Mike, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh, everybody that was involved in pulling the program together, the Institute for Education team. We have over 30 representatives from 30 countries, which is emblematic of what the Institute for Education is all about. So thank you, and welcome again to our new AI diplomatic steward. October 1st, everybody should register right away. Is our next program. It will be an evening salon with adult beverages at your home. The presidential debate is September 29th, and we are having a salon with Margaret Brennan, the CBS News Face the Nation senior foreign policy correspondent. At 6:30 East Coast time, she's going to tell us all of her insights on the debate and what's going on with everything in her world. So it will be incredibly insightful, firsthand, inside the Beltway information. So I hope you'll all register for that.